Great. So thank you everyone for joining us. And I was just, talking to Ajit, before the session. I was just sort of sitting in my hotel room yesterday, right, 11th floor, and this swanky car basically just caught my attention, right? And of course, I wear specs and I couldn't see it down there. I almost walked up to the window and sort of pinched my fingers trying to zoom the window out, so so that's what the digital world has done to us today, right? We not only want our digital experiences to be fantastic and fabulous, we want our physical spaces today to actually behave like our, the digital clones, right? So that's the modern consumer for you today. The Amazons, and I'm sure you heard in the last session, right? The Amazons and the Starbucks of the world, they are actually creating those experiences for us, which we expect in all the brands, whether it's financial institutions, or retail experiences alike, right? So those are the mental models we are carrying, So, and banking, financial institutions have to deal with these kind of consumers today, right? Now, banks on the other side have also come a long way, right? So if you ask a 20-year-old something today to go to a bank branch with a checkbook, he'll be like, excuse me, what's a branch, checkbook? Relationship manager, who's that? I'm not getting married ever, so who's a relationship manager, right? So on one side, we have banks like the USAA and Navy Fed who are driving innovation, with providing tools for, for consumers themselves to do their financial planning, to do their retirement planning, etc. And we also have banks which are now, online only, right? So this whole concept of branchless banking, which has just come up, right? And it's just a very interesting bank I was reading about, Monzo in Europe, right? Which has taken customer experience to this whole new level, right? So believe it or not, when you register with that bank, they ask you to, declare, of course, if you want to, your mental state. Right, you heard it right, your mental state, right? So your buying patterns, your buying habits, do you shop on Amazon at night? How many of us do night shopping? With a show of hands. After 10 p.m., after 8 p.m., right? So this new concept of, not sleepwalking, sleep shopping has just come up, right? So just before we're sleeping, we just order all those unnecessary things all the time, right? So it's kind of identified those patterns, right? And it's asking consumers to, declare all of that while registering for that bank so that they can actually help you keep a check on your debts, right? They help you get out of those debts also. I mean, they've very interesting, what they've done is also hired somebody who they call the head of financial difficulties, right, who's helping these consumers come out of that personal debt, right? So that's some customer centricity we are talking about today, right? So welcome you all to the 2018 Banking Customer Experience Summit. Today we are going to try and dissect this customer experience and understand, what really drives it and how are banks and FIs really, drawing, stuff out of it, and how is digital and AI playing a role, right? So I'm Neha, I'm a part of Birlasoft, which is one such organization creating exceptional experiences for Fortune 500 firms, working with a lot of banks and financial institutions. And with me today, I have a very interesting panel. Thank you all for joining us today. We have, I'll introduce the lady first, with your permission.
Sure, beauty before the beast.
Yeah, so we have Christine today with us. Who joins us from Wells Fargo. She's Senior Vice President with the Digital Product Management team and is responsible, for the team that drives the entire strategy and delivery of the digital products. Been with the bank for almost 12 years now, Christine, and she's been behind many, the firsts that Wells Fargo has done in the digital and customer experience, phase. Anything, Christine, that you would like to add?
No, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited that we're all here talking about this because I think there's a lot of opportunity in this space, both for banks, within the financial services industry and inside, and also how financial services are partnering, outside of our industry too. So I'm really excited.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christine. We also have Kader with us today, joining us from BMO. He's a Director, Technology and Business Management. He leads the entire portfolio management discipline for BMO in the US, and is also Chief of Staff for the CIO, for the US CIO, Deepa Soni. and has been behind many innovative, actually both these banks have been at the realm of customer experience in their own regions. They've been the pioneers of innovation and customer experience, right? So Kader has been behind many such initiatives, the Facebook Messenger chatbot and various initiatives that BMO has taken. Kader, anything that you would like to add to that?
No, thank you. Very excited to be here. For me, it's like I want to learn more from the team here as well, right? They have a lot of this experience that you guys bring to the table, and then the cross-pollination is going to help us to be better. For us, like at least in BMO, the whole customer experience has become part of our DNA. Interesting enough is like one of the KPI that we give every employee is what did you do and add value to customer experience, right? So your bonus is tied to how can you create exceptional value from a customer experience perspective. So excited to be part, sharing it with Christian up here and Ajit too, so thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Kader. And we also have Ajit Chawla, who's VP Birlasoft, joining us with the service integrator point of view, right? So Ajit has been part of many strategic initiatives on customer experience for various customers, in fact, within and outside of banking as well. So Ajit, thank you for joining us. Anything that you would like to add?
Thanks for having me here, Neha, and good to be part of this forum. And it's interesting to represent a service provider, a partner view here. Normally you look at the end consumers, the banks in this forum who are leading this initiative, but the providers have a big role to play. How are they shaping up? What are their point of views on how the customers could actually expedite their digital journeys, where to invest? And I firmly believe that customer experience has to be at the center of all digital initiatives. So much so that you almost want to quantify the customer experience, and as Kader mentioned, have incentives attached to it that whatever you're doing, are you adding value to the customer experience, and hence is the end consumer going to benefit from it? So happy to be here, here to learn and get a lot of views, but also happy to represent a service provider view.
Thank you, Ajit. Thank you very much. So with that, we'll begin today's session. But before that, for the audience, your thoughts and questions are very important for us. So we've parked about 10 minutes towards the end of the session to take your questions. But in case there is any burning question on something that's being discussed that you want to talk about, please feel free to just raise your hand and we will take that question for you. Thank you so much. Okay, shall we begin? Great. So there's been this whole buzz around customer experience and how digital and AI is now playing a role in this whole thing, right? But at the heart of all this, before even we think of technology, right, at the heart of all this is really the consumer, and how well do you understand the consumer and adapt these technologies to that consumer, right? So let's talk about some of the initiatives that you're hearing. What is your point of view? What changes do you see coming in the industry with this buzz?
So let me go at it, right? So it's interesting when I actually sitting up here and watching, you have this tilted head syndrome, right? So every one of us is right here kind of ready to look at our messages or emails. If you look back about 10 years ago, what Apple did and how it actually transformed the behavior of a customer, right? It's not only instant gratification, but it's kind of driven you where I need everything in my hand, right? How can you deliver whatever you're kind of selling, either it might be a product or a service, how can you get to me in my hand? And I want to basically figure it out right away. If not, then I need to go to somebody else, right? So it's been a kind of an interesting dynamics, which has kind of driven the customer behavior, which drives, at least within BMO, I know Christian would agree with this as well, right? On kind of looking at customer in a different lens, right? And at least within BMO, what we have actually started doing is kind of have a multi-year digital strategy program and also a digitization process that we are trying to go through. How do we actually make things more efficient and effective so we can deliver to the right customer the right content at the right time, right? And that is how banking is going to be in the future. So there's a lot of investment that we are trying to put in where we can go through the journey, kind of get more customer insights. And like as you had mentioned, we've been working with a lot of the bots out there and with social media like Facebook to start getting not only the spending pattern of a customer, but also their social factor. So we can integrate them together to kind of get a better customer insights. So then we can deliver the right content back to them, even just on our product and services side. So that's how, at least, we've been looking at the lens. So I don't know, Kristen, if you have something to add to it.
Sure. No, I agree, and I'll just weigh in with a personal customer experience that I had yesterday, because I was thinking of, what this experience was like and how it could be so much better. Was, I recently, which was poor timing, moved to Charlotte 2 months ago, and now with the get there just in time for the biggest hurricane in 50 years, and so I need to change my flights for this trip. And so I went yesterday onto our corporate travel site, and which I could not access from my phone. I had to go on to a desktop to do, which, if you're traveling, it's not a great use case, it's not a great experience. So I went on there. I had to scroll through all of the different trips that I've done to find the right one. Once I found it, I clicked on the site, and then I found a link that said, change this flight. I clicked on it. It was a clickable link. I clicked on it, and it said, this link has been disabled. And so then I thought, okay, so then I had to find the phone number. I found the phone number, was on hold, for 45 minutes because of, clearly there's a lot of people calling. And, once I got a rep, she was very helpful, but very flustered, clearly with a lot of everything that was going on. So asked me what flight would I like to be on, and then put me on hold for another 10 minutes, made the change, and then said, thank you, it's done, goodbye. And then when I was done with that, I thought, I have to change my hotel too, right? And so I hadn't canceled my hotel. And so I wasn't gonna go back and wait for 45 minutes. So then I had to walk down into the hotel and change. So I went online, I called somebody on the phone, and I visited a physical location to try to solve my problem. And I thought that could have been such a better experience. And how I would see it is, if I were in Charlotte, right, I would have proactively received some sort of notification saying, you know what, if you go on this trip, just be aware you might have problems getting back. Do you still want to go? Yes, I still want to go. So I get here, and then I get a notification saying, you know what, the weather's not looking good. You might want to go change your flight. Okay, great. So, and here's the one I recommend for you based on the time that you want to get back. Oh, we see that you have a hotel link to it. Let me cancel that for you. Oh, and we see that you're probably going to need to get to the airport. Based on where I know you are and when you need to be at your flight, I'm going to proactively look at the amount of time you need to get there, and I'm going to get an Uber for you. And I'm going to notify my mother, who's scared of all of this hurricane that's going on. I'm going to notify her that this is happening. And then I'll make the transportation requirements, on the Charlotte side. And then I thought that would be wow. That would be the experience. I don't think anyone's there yet. I don't think that within this industry, I think we're making progress towards that. I think that would be a great experience. At Wells Fargo, I think we're making steps towards that. We have experiences where we're launching around predictive banking, where we're looking at proactive insights around your spending, so that we can help customers avoid negative situations. We have a greenhouse, which is a new bank experience that we're launching for new to bank customers that I think will help address some of this. And then we also have Pay with Wells Fargo, which is something that we're going to be launching in pilot, and we're launching to team members, which is really kind of personalized and helping you get to the payment experiences that you want to. So, but I think as an industry overall, I'm really excited because I would love to have that experience that I just outlined.
And I think that's where the amalgamation of artificial intelligence and as a technology brings in mindset change to experience. Because a few years back, if you talked about experience, and that iceberg picture kind of reflects that well, you would only be talking about how the application looks like. Is there a mobility interface? Is there a web interface? So on and so forth. And that kind of summed up the experience for you. Whereas experience is so much more than that. And with the sort of profiling and the sort of intelligence that you talked about, now artificial intelligence makes it makes it real, and a lot of companies are investing in that. So that is where this coming together of how artificial intelligence improves the customer experience, the topic for this this session is really the reality for tomorrow.
Absolutely. And very interestingly, Christine, you talked about some of these channels, right, that you had to go through, the physical as well as the digital ones, right? And I think when we talk of customer experience, one of the key things is to really create a uniformity across these channels, right? Not just have exceptional experience on that one channel, but how do you provide a seamless, I would say not broken experience, right? Now there are various ways of doing that, and various approaches that everybody is taking. We know USA has actually is now investing in design thinking, with the new studio in Austin, right? What has Wells Fargo's approach been to this whole thing and to the entire innovation? How do you see it and how do you visualize this whole change from a Wells Fargo perspective?
It's a great question. I mean, I think it's not trivial, right? To be able to really look at uniformity across all of the channels. And we talk about digital channels, right? You have websites, you have apps, we have a Wells Fargo community, which is the customer-facing community. We have bankers that are supporting customers through social channels. ATM is a digital, interaction channel. So having that uniformity, I would say, is dependent on two things in my mind. One is really being grounded in the customer. What is the customer journey that we are trying to support? What are our customer needs? And truly, truly understanding that. And within that, right, so understanding what our customer needs are in the first place. Once you launch an experience, really listening to feedback, and that can be hard sometimes, right? You want to see the feedback with your filtered view of this is going great or this isn't working, but really truly listening to what the customer is telling us. And we have such, the collective, we have such rich data sources these days, both in terms of how customers are interacting with experiences, as well as survey data that we have. We look at App Store reviews to hear from our customers. So we have great data sources to really listen. And then as a follow-up on that, being able to act very quickly on these changes, which again, kind of in big organizations can sometimes be a challenge because you have dependencies between, we would love to all have small, agile, independent teams, and that would be fantastic. And I think that we're making some strides there. I think that there are realistic dependencies where you have platforms that cross teams, you have rules and regulations that cross teams. So I think those are real items that need to be deliberately thought through. So I would say, again, being grounded in the customer, being able to listen and respond. And then the second one I would say is the data, right? Is the data, being able to have data that's consistently accessible and in a format that can be consumed, I think is really important.
Sure, very interesting. Again, I'm going to take a thread from there. She talked about, Kader, the importance of data, and getting it from various data sources. How important is it to close that loop? So.
Absolutely, right. So one of the initiatives that within BMO that we've been focused on is to kind of get a 360 view of a customer. The challenge that's been, right, if you look at the past 20 years of banking, it's all been, relationship-based banking. So you had different kind of people having different relationship, but getting a customer, a 360 view of a customer and seeing all the relationship that's happening. So that will start giving us much more insights to kind of drive what kind of product and services we need to get to them. So there's a major initiative that we've been doing where we are kind of consolidating all of these data from all these different channels and all these different relationships and trying to kind of say, if I need to kind of find like Neha, what kind of relationship she has with the bank, then I can actually know what are the ones that I need to cross-sell or upsell to Neha rather than trying to kind of, trying to sell a duplicate product back to you, because one, if I try to sell the same thing, you're going to get frustrated, right? Yeah. So there's a huge investment that we are doing in kind of getting the data and kind of get what we call it a customer 360 view of the customer. Mm-hmm. So that can drive a lot of the analytics and trying to kind of find the relationship that's attached to it and then start kind of figuring out what are the services that we could kind of potentially go. Because, and on top of it is also, if you look at banking, right? So we are all kind of, because of the regulation that's happening, we've been very, very traditional kind of product development organizations, right? And with the new age of technology and the culture of Agile coming in, we are trying to kind of start piloting some of those areas to see how we can collect the data quicker so we can respond to the customer quicker as well. So it's, I agree with Kristen, right? We have to go through a journey. There's a lot of other pieces that kind of might be blockers, but we have to figure a way to kind of go around it a little bit and get to the 360 view of our customers. Then we can start kind of giving their insights, right, of what they need and start doing what, banking in a much more different way.
Absolutely, and I think the key here is to actually use that data to use it for personalization, like you just pointed out, right? So how many times have we got a call for a product or let's say a credit card that we already have? How many of you have got such a call for a product, selling product which you already have? See?
Everyone.
Right.
Yeah, so that's there. But what do you think is the, I was just, Forrester did this research around customer experience index for banks, right? And they said in this whole process that you talked about, effectiveness and efficiency actually play a role. More than 50% contribution is done by these two factors in the customer experience, in creating the end experience. How do you think BMO has taken this initiative around efficiency in some of the
So
areas?
as I was kind of giving it to the previous one, right? Like, so we are investing very heavily on kind of bringing agile as a culture as part of the organization, right? Because being at a very regulated traditional banking, traditional methodology approach, bringing agile into the mix is going to kind of drive some of the efficiency that we can bring. The other major initiative that we've been trying to do is digitization, because to give you an example, like for us to get a auto loan through our process for a customer took about 3 weeks. That's how our process was, right? Like, there's a lot of paperwork. You have to go to the branch for additional documentation, bring them back, and then work on it, sign it, give it back to them, and then they'll actually go ahead, re-enter the data, and then in 3 weeks, you'll know whether you're approved or not, right? Now, what we are actually doing is kind of using AI to do auto loan decisioning, where we can at least tell you directionally whether you're approved or not approved, or we need additional information, and then start gathering those information quickly from the customer through a digital channel, so then we can actually work on delivering the product pretty quickly to them. So that is one area that we've been focused on, trying to drive efficiencies. So the culture change of agile, like, and I'm kind of beating out this a little bit because that is going to be significant for us to be able to kind of change the mindset, because as you guys know, we have our parent ship is BMO, right? And from a Canadian side, and then the competition there is like 4 banks, right? When you come back to BMO Harris, I walk down the street from Chicago, there's 20,000 banks around me. So the marketing and the landscape and also the competition landscape is completely different for us, right? So putting the agility and putting the effectiveness in trying to kind of give the instant gratification to the customer is going to be a key success for us that we're actually investing very heavily on at this point.
Absolutely. So Ajit, I'm sure you're working across various initiatives, multiple clients as well, and industries, right? What are those use cases that you are hearing, the need for AI? What do customers expect AI to do for them?
See, use cases are very similar to what Christine and Kader talked about. From the very point the customer starts interacting with an institute, in this case bank, they expect you to actually have be able to take quick decisions. Loan approvals, for example. Bring in AI. Do personalization, persona creations, etc. So the profile of the customer, and now you can do social analytics. You could do data insights, etc. Create a customer 360 view. So to your point, if I am calling in a bank for a home loan and somebody else calls me back for a credit card that I already have, I don't want to kind of have that conversation, because I want my request to be managed and done as fast as it can be. Now, obviously there's a whole gamut of decision making that needs to happen. KYC, risk assessment, customer onboarding, and on all of that can actually now be expedited quite a bit using AI. And that is what the customers expect. That is what the millennials expect. To your earlier point, they don't want to spend a lot of time, on the IVR phone lines or in the banks. They want, things to happen quickly. They're running out of patience, and that is where AI can actually bring in that speed. But I do want to add, to what Christine and Kader also said earlier, because all of this sounds easy. This is maybe 5 years down the line, it'll be easier. But the point is, the data, being critical. But at the same time, I've seen every customer that I've spoken to struggling with managing the data, because you have so many sources of data, and you'll have, multiple customer masters. You'll have, lots of data sitting which has not been, cleaned up. So data quality is a problem. So as Kader and Christine said, there are multi-year programs that are going in to just get the data right, because only then you can have the right insights. You could do customer 360 and so on and so forth. So lots of use cases, but some of these foundations really are the ones that many customers are right now focusing on.
Great, thanks Ajit. So Christine, we've been talking about some of the mobile and social initiatives that Wells has also taken, right? So there's the app, there's the Facebook Messenger chatbot, that was started some time back, right? So what has been the journey to this whole predictive, sort of thing? What is Greenhouse and what is Pay with Wells? So tell us a little bit about these initiatives.
Sure. So I would say the journey, I think, is one of testing, right? Of test and learn, really testing with our customers, doing it in a way that's controlled where we can get the right learnings, doing it in a safe way for our customers. So I would say we have tested, so I mentioned predictive banking. That is something that we rolled out earlier this year. And what it does is it basically looks at a customer's transactions, behaviors, and says, hey, this is, we feel like maybe you could save more by doing X. Or, we feel like maybe, based on what we know, you might not have the funds to cover what we know about, your bills coming up. And so it's really the proactive kind of, we tested that. So back to the test and learn, we tested that, got some great feedback from users around what was useful and what was less useful. So I think it's really the approach of testing. Did the same with you mentioned the Facebook Messenger chatbot. That was something that we really, kind of taking the mindset of meeting the customers where they are. So extending the banking services to where our customers already are and wanting to test that. So we had a small pilot for about a year where we were really testing kind of what did customers value around kind of the conversational aspect. What use cases did they really feel were valuable? Or less valuable, and I think those learnings are definitely going to inform, some future learnings that future efforts that we have at Wells Fargo in the chatbot area. You mentioned Greenhouse, so that is a separate mobile app experience that we are planning later this year to be able to launch to a small population of customers that's really focused on helping customers that are really new to banking, not new to Wells Fargo, new to banking, to manage their finances, from a day-to-day management perspective, help them understand where their money is going as well. So again, I think that you talked about the journey, and I think the journey really is we want to be able to try it in small ways. And this is kind of similar to the agile, path of how do we try things in small ways versus, I think years ago, right, on the waterfall path, we wrote our requirements 9 months ago, and then we launched something to everybody, and then, if we want to change something, well, that'll take another year. And so it's really about the agility, being able to test in small ways, and then being able to be agile. And like I mentioned, listen to the feedback, what are we really hearing from the customers, and then being able to take those learnings and do something else with it in a pretty flexible and rapid way.
So and this is the classic model and pattern I see across multiple customers. You mentioned Forrester said or claimed that customer experience was improved 80%, while the consumers actually said 8%. And part of the problem is this, because when we try to do too much and take too long to do that, by the time you have something out, for people to test, they're not interested in that anymore. So you really need to have smaller sprints, fail fast, so that you're able to capture that feedback. And that's that is very critical for the digital world, especially the new digital world, because we're talking about chatbots, we're talking about Amazon Alexa, Google Homes, and so on and so on, the words. But they are changing the way consumers are interacting with organizations, and not everybody is going to be comfortable with that. So there's a huge change management that needs to be done to be able to get these ideas to the level of adoption that you envisage, and that's where it's important to do it quickly, get some feedback. Kind of have that, fail fast model so that you are able to identify who are your user champions and who are the users who you really need to take along in this journey, right? And hence that 80% to 8% variation.
Absolutely. And how do you think this is different for different kind of users, right? So still, I think the user gap is also increasing a lot, right? So on one end of the spectrum, you have those, baby boomers, traditional banking users who are still not very well versed with those technologies, with the new technologies, let's say the conversational channels. On the other hand of the spectrum, we have, one of my colleagues was telling me 3-year-olds who are actually, working on Apple TVs and, are setting up Alexas in the house by themselves, right? So how do we sort of bridge this gap? Because as a bank, you have to cater to, both these sets, right? So.
No, that's true, right? So from our, at least from a BMO perspective, one of the challenges that we've been kind of looking at is that spectrum, right? Like for us, when we looked at about 3 years ago, our average age was in the 50s of the customers that we had. And then when we look at the customer base again now, right, it's like in the 20s, 30s, right? Because the whole portfolio is kind of migrating from the baby boomers to the new millennials and the next generation, the mass affluent that's coming on. And as Christian and Ajit was saying, it's the agility part that's going to kind of drive us to kind of get the insight. And not only that, right? Like, how many of you guys still like Mario, the game, right? Trying to save the princess. There you go. And I'm still trying to save the princess right there,
Mario.
right? But look at what, right? The whole gamification approach, right? The Mario concept, if you look at it, it's like, you go kind of get a bunch of coins and you have a goal, and your goal is to go and save the princess to get in. And we in the BMO, we have started kind of taking an approach like that, right? So we have launched a pilot, or the process of launching a pilot, and there's internal pilot that's already been done, is to kind of use gamification process in a specifically going on goal-based savings, right? Like, how do you set up some goals, and how do you drive yourself, right? And where we can actually give you the intelligence behind, right? And simple things like, hey, if you don't drink 2 coffees today, well, you can put another 250 back into the play, right? As simple as that, to kind of having some complex algorithms behind and saying that you can potentially save a lot more and achieve your goal faster if you do, these are the steps that you could take. So there's a lot of kind of incentive, like in the customer behavior, if you give them and help them and aid them to get there faster, right? So, they're not kind of looking at saying, what, I have a goal, and like, and can you help me analyze it? They're kind of looking at us like, yes, I have a goal, but can I achieve it faster? In some cases, the goal might not be right. Like, as you kind of go through the journey, that you can actually change the goal, and you can refund your transactions and still achieve the newer goal that you want to take. So there's quite a bit of kind of, change in behavior and customer that's happening. So we are actually taking both design-led thinking, agility as part of it, and also using the gamification approach to kind of bring all this together. Because if you look at all these app games, right? I mean, I can say like 80% of us, like, would have played Candy Rush either way, right? So if you look at it, like, the level just keeps going on, right? And then there's like, how do you actually incrementally kind of get you more and more interested in kind of getting the next step is going to be the way that banking is going to go to. And we as a banks, we should be able to be nimble to adapt and be able to deliver those, right? So that's going to be the key. And I think I agree with Ajit, right? Like, the AI component is going to be very crucial for us, right? We know we have the data. We are kind of working on, like, the test and learn that Kristen was telling, right? And now, how do you actually take that and apply it and, kind of show it quickly is what the customers are looking at, right? The expectations are there. So, within BMO, we are kind of doing quite a bit of pilot launches at this point in time as well on the gamification application for goal settings. We are actually getting out our new, what we call our online and mobile banking, which just got piloted starting last month. So it's in pilot phase right now. So there's quite a bit of learning that we are learning and trying to kind of make things better, and, so that the customer can do banking as they intend to do, right?
Sure. Can I add one quick point on that? Because I 100% agree with what you're saying. One very tactical thing that we do around, understand, you talked about a 3-year-old versus a 60-year-old, right? We have a great partners internally, our research and design partners internally, and they create personas, right, which I would imagine are done in a lot of companies. But it's less around the age, and it's definitely more around the attitude towards financial services, right? It's you could have 2 people that are both 40 years old with very different attitudes. One wants to have it be a science of, I want to know every cent that is spent coming out of my checking account, and one that was like, I'm okay living closer to the line. And that's okay. We just have to make sure that, we don't need to tell those people that are okay living closer to the line that you need to change that. They're not going to change. That's how they live, right? And we need to help them make sure that we are giving them the right information, that we are helping them avoid any bad situations. And so that is, I think, again, it's based on kind of the attitudes of having those personas. That gets back to the uniformity too, right? Of how do we have that consistent across the company?
I think that's a very great approach, to look at it. Even from a persona perspective, it's a
so
new
in
thing.
fact, just to add to what you said, there is no single solution for, when you talk about, what you do as digital, you cannot have a single solution for everyone. You
Absolutely.
have different customer segments. Age is just one of those, criteria which defines a persona. And 30 years fast forward, we'll be, that generation will be talking about us, that 70-year-olds, they don't know how to work with robots, because the robots will be your relationship managers and so on. So essentially, the whole idea is, how do you create personas, attitude-based, technology-savvy based, their own, somebody really wants to talk to a relationship manager and not to a bot or a chat, or a IVR. And I was talking to a digital evangelist in Forrester, and I asked him this question: what do you automate? He said, if there is a process or an exchange which requires a human touch, don't automate that, because you may save cost, but you lose a customer, right? True. So those distinctions are very important when you're actually doing this, because you can't really have one solution fixing all the problems. And that is where, again, the test and learn, brings in a lot of, opportunity to test different personas, different customer profiles, etc., and figure out your strategy. And if for global banks like Wells, BMO, you'll have different strategies across geographies, because some will be wanting to work with bots, some would want, more personal touch, so that's how it really works.
Absolutely, very true. And also, when we talk of data here, right, so which is kind of at the heart of artificial intelligence, right, there's this whole set of security issues which also come into picture, right? So whether they're, you're getting data on social, card information being read. And I was just, reading this, post on Twitter where, this person was actually clicking a selfie like this, right? I'm sure all of you have, seen that one. And there is this, biometric information which can actually be read from that photo, right? So now there are biometric concealers which you can wear on your fingers, so that your biometric information can't be read from your selfies, right? So that's the age that we're living in today, right? So at one end there is this whole power that the data brings in, but it's kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it? So how are we dealing with the security side of data?
So at least from a BMO perspective, right, like our DNA, information security and cybersecurity has actually become more foundational rather than an add-on service, because we are so regulated, right, in all different ways. So our biggest, if I talk to OCC, if I talk to FRB, the meetings they're saying is like, how are you protecting customer information? How are you making sure that the data is not leaking anywhere, right? So that's the key that basically is, and now, so it's become more of a foundational services. So from BMO's perspective, whatever we are doing internally and with external customers and vendors as well, and saying like, how are we going to be kind of making sure that the right protocol and the right processes are put around to secure the data around this, right? Because without that, like for us, for us to do business becomes kind of pretty difficult. The nimbleness is very important, but you have to draw the line where you're going to be nimble and where you're kind of making sure that the data is protected and delivered to in the right way. And so, at least the last, if you look at the pattern that's happened in the banking industry about 5 years ago, it was all about AML, right? Like, so if you look at what was happening is like, if you knew anything about AML, you got a job, right? And now the trend has kind of gone in, it's like, if you know anything about information security, you have a job tomorrow, right?
That's true.
It's that trend that's actually migrating and that tells a story, right? That literally tells a story on how the banking industry is kind of moving towards and what it's becoming important and core to the organization itself. And BMO has always been like, because of the Canadian kind of footprint that we are a very, very conservative bank, right? So we talk about nimbleness on the US side, kind of trying to work through, but as an organization, we are very, very, very conservative. So every step that we take, sometimes, like I say, our process is killing us, like to get to the customer faster, but sometimes those processes needed, right? The right process is needed, right? In kind of helping pull the information, and protect the information and deliver that information the right way to the customer becomes important. So you have to kind of figure out what's the right line and what's the balance you're going to do in driving that kind of, journey to get the information back to the customer.
Absolutely, absolutely, makes sense. So as Bill Gates puts it, right, so we always overestimate what's going to happen in the next 2 years and underestimate what's going to happen in the next 10 years, right? Today we have banks with, pre-approved loans, opening bank accounts, Fedora Bank in less than 5 minutes. So Ajit, what do you think is the next in banking? What is the realistic 2 years and 10 years roadmap?
Well, in 10 years, you'll have robots all over. There'll be your relationship managers. You'll have artificial intelligence, reality, in mainstream, etc. But that's kind of 10 years in my view. But in the next 2 to 3 years, I think there's going to be a lot of mainstream adoption of AI, and and marrying that with the data to actually be able to take some of these decisions faster than because right now you see a lot of these projects are in the POC stage. Some customers are ahead, some banks are ahead of the others, but essentially that is where the mainstream adoption of AI and marrying with the data will come in to bring in some of this standardization across user experiences, right? Whether it is about onboarding, risk assessment, anti-money laundering, GDPR, and so on and so forth. So that is where the focus is going to be in the next 2 years, and that is where I think the opportunity also is that how do you engage with the wider population? How do you kind of quantify and monetize user experience / customer experience? Because the success is going to be how some of these initiatives are adopted by the end consumer, not how the bank perceives or a customer perceives how well they have done it. The success is how the consumers really adopt that.
Absolutely, and I was just reading about this Korean bank which said, right now we are using apps and we are using, some sort of different interfaces on which we're interacting. Eventually it will be, I want to see a bank account with the wave of a hand, blink of an eye, I'm able to see see my portfolio, so it's all going to be gesture control, augmented reality, etc. Any thoughts on that? How is augmented reality going to play a role in at least sort of a bankless, branchless banking?
Everything that you see in movies comes in, becomes a reality in 20 years, right? So that is how it's. So you're right. Some of those augmented realities, mixed realities, etc. will be realities soon, and some banks have started experimenting with that. So obviously, as biometric technologies, retina-based scans, facial recognition, some of these technologies become more mainstream. Artificial intelligence, becomes more mainstream. You have rich data sets, etc. So that day is not far.
Sure.
Absolutely.
To add to Ajit, right? Like, so we are researching some things on the augmented reality, and DBS. I don't know how many of you guys know. It's a Singapore bank. Yes. They've actually kind of tied augmented reality, and they actually have a solution right now, which is amazing, right? Like, where you go into the branch, and if you're like between the 18 and 34, you can actually put your VR goggles. You can do whatever you can multitask, and then say, what your balance is. Kind of okay, then I can still continue to do my work, which is an amazing kind of case study for us to kind of look into. So we are kind of heavily looking into. I think what Kristen actually said is like, look at the persona and then be able to give the content based on the persona at the medium and the channel they're looking for, right? For us, the banking always channel has been, it's online apps, or like you're going to call customers, or you're going to go to the branch, right? But then there's other channels that actually kind of are coming up because of the digital strategy. Is like, how do we start playing in those areas is going to be a critical piece on how we need to work.
That's a good point.
Right?
And how does the continuity go from that channel to a live person too?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So you don't have that big gap in experience.
Yep. Absolutely.
And that's where this entire question flows on, how do we really measure it? So like they say, Forbes puts it, right? So a great experience for a bank can be worth millions. Right. So how do you think we can measure all of this, and give some quantified, sort of metrics out of these initiatives?
So I'll chime in. So I'm on the customer-facing side, so my bias is always going to be we need to look at how our customers feel about this. So customer satisfaction, really, we get a lot of input from our customers around how they're feeling around different experiences, but I think that is really measurable. It really, in terms of looking at loyalty, in terms of looking at engagement, I do think with AI and with chatbots, that thinking about what engagement looks like is a little different. So if you have a customer that's engaging with a chatbot, for example, and asking 10 questions, is that a good thing because they're engaged with a chatbot and asking 10 questions because the chatbot's providing a lot of value? Or is that a bad thing because you had to ask the chatbot 10 times the same question for them to get it right? So I think looking specifically at understanding really looking at the use case, I would say, of the AI application that we are implementing, right? When we're talking about measuring the impact of an AI, if you have a back office, application of it, fraud, for example, well, fraud's not back, but if you have a fraud application, it would be really the decrease in fraud, right? So being able to measure specifically, I think, what the application is. I was listening to go ahead for you guys.
No, go ahead.
I was listening to a podcast, and it was about a company, and I'm blanking on the name of the company, but it was specific. They specifically focus on reviewing. It was an AI-based company that was specifically focused on reviewing expense reports. And so they said that was just, I mean, for a lot of big organizations, the expense reports is a huge, expense, right, for the company. And they were just able to measure massive amounts of savings by being able to, I mean, that's what AI is great at, looking at patterns, looking at things that don't make sense when you had somebody expensing something in Chicago and then in Charlotte at the same day, right? And so with two different people. And so I think that's, being able to measure, starting, I would say, the effort too, and really focusing on what are we trying to get out of this effort. So we all love cool technologies, right? But really looking at what are we trying to do for the customer? What are we trying to do if it's a back office application? What are we trying to do for our bankers if it's a bank application? Really looking at what the goals are, and then figuring out if measuring those specific applications.
Sure.
And I would say that this is one of the easier wins with AI, because and my apologies for saying that, but a lot of organizations do not do enough to measure the customer experience. Mm-hmm. You perhaps, for example, wait for a customer feedback, as you said, customer satisfaction surveys, etc. But there are very, unidirectional ways of measuring customer experiences right now, and that's one of the reasons, why you still go back to the point of 80% versus 10% variation. So, we've been working with different customers and bringing in what we call as a true CX framework, true customer experience. But the whole idea is really how do you bring in natural language processing, AI, read into the data, because there is data, the data is talking to us, we're just not listening into it. So how do you really build, the whole intelligence layer on top of it, do pattern analysis, heuristics analysis, social listening, sentiment analysis, a number of steps, basic things. But bring in an index out of it, which gives you some feedback that where do you think the customer today is, and are there opportunities for improvement? And that kind of then back feeds into all of that, back-end enablement that needs to be done, automation, chatbot, data management, and so on and so forth. But then you have indication coming from the customer by applying AI on the data to know how the customer experience is.
Absolutely.
That's very true, right? Like from our perspective, that's why when I initially mentioned about Customer 360, right? Like for us, even to kind of measure what our customer has with us, let alone kind of what we want them to be, it was a challenge, right? And what the journey that we are taking and kind of migrating towards is like, okay, now we know what our customer, he or she is and what they are doing and from a relationship with the bank. How are we going to start measuring on the products or increases they're going to give us back, right? And start looking at some kind of process to forecast it, and then start measuring against it and saying, are we kind of doing it? So then we can start doing a lot of course correction as we go through, right? Like Christian said, that's where the test and learn is going to help us quite a bit in saying, okay, let's test some strategies that we think based on what the pattern that we are seeing. Can we apply that, see if it is, and if that customer behavior changes, great. If not, let's kind of test another one as quickly as possible, right? That's going to be a key for us to kind of drive to success, so.
Sure. And since you're also, Kader, leading the US Vendor Management Office, right? So what would be your advice for service integrators, like ourselves, to, sort of what kind of skills, have to be added? Any different sort of way of working that, these vendors should bring in? At least the mandate that I've given for my vendor management team and the vendors, right, is to focus on, what each of us are bringing specifically on the experience perspective, right? Like what are we looking for from a customer experience? A lot of the historical challenge with system integrators has been, and I've been one of them as well with Accenture days, but we come back with a framework, right? Mm-hmm. And saying, here's a framework, let's try to fit you in. And that's not true anymore, right? Like for us, it's we have to understand the data, understand the pattern, and then come back and say, what would be the right way to kind of implement the experience that we want to give to our customers, right? So that's going to be a key in vendors kind of coming back to us and saying, here's thought leadership that we found in specifically which drives your customers experience index, or here's the type of experience that we have actually done. That experience mattered to us rather than the frameworks, right? So that is going to be a key. Obviously, the framework is going to be an accelerator to jumpstart some of the processes, but bringing that kind of experience to us to kind of help us, because a lot of times what I kind of love
And when a part of my organization focuses on fintech, I love those fintechers because they're not bound by frameworks, right? They're there kind of sitting and innovating, like, and saying, what am I going to break, right? And interesting enough is like how the vendors that's going in is like not only fintechs, like now, like, companies like Amazon and Google are also kind of operating in that space, right? So how are we going to be able to kind of work? And that's when we need a lot of thought leadership from a lot of the vendors to bring it back in and kind of tie that bow together for us, right?
I agree. I completely concur with you because now it's no more a game of scale, number of years of industry experience, and so on and so forth. You don't really need to even know where your developers are. They could be sitting at a wedding and doing the coding, etc. Or sitting at home. They don't need to be around because end of the day, to Kadur's point.
I hope not their own wedding.
So to Kadur's point, it is about the solution they're delivering and more importantly, the problem they're solving. And now it's not going to be one vendor, one partner knows it all, brings it all. You will have intelligent integration of solutions, and that's where the open APIs and microservices, etc., comes in because you can find one solution from one partner and then from another,
exactly.
And size doesn't matter. It could be a boutique company doing a great work with AI, and some of which are up for display, on the third floor. That's the beauty of the digital solutions now.
Absolutely, interesting conversation. So. We have 10 minutes left now. We'll open for some audience questions. Yes, please.
One of the challenges with AI is it's a black box that nobody really knows what's going on inside of there. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how satisfied you are with your predictive capabilities and kind of what your journey was for improving them. I mean, how did you start going through this process of buying something that really nobody really understands?
And also one request, if you could let us know your name and the organization you represent as well, please.
My name is Tim Tang. I'm with
Okay.
I can start.
Okay,
so,
sure.
So I would say again. I mean, I think that from a Wells Fargo perspective, there's a lot of options, that have been on the table from on the beginning, right? Of looking at different vendors, looking at internal capabilities to be able to develop AI, and I do think, I think that right now you're right, is how much into the black box, if it's not your own, can you go? Should you go? Do you want to go? I think that there are, that is still something that I think is still being worked through, at least internally within Wells Fargo, because there are trade-offs, right? I mean, really around if you're purchasing a vendor solution, again, speaking from a bank perspective, if you're speaking, if you're purchasing a bank solution, then you don't have visibility into that black box, right? It's not your black box. But at the same time, there's a big aspect of speed to market too, and but on the other side is really looking at your own capabilities internally and what you can build and the resources and the skills as you continue to develop it. So that's not an exactly straightforward answer to your question, but I would say it's still something that is kind of being evaluated, at least within Wells Fargo.
See, within BMO, what we have actually done is we have actually reorganized some of our technology and operations group, right? Again, the focus is right now is within our data governance side, have a specific AI group that their job is to kind of work with not only different vendors, but also start thinking from an R&D perspective, right? What can we do, right? Like, let's try to create our own black box if we can, rather than kind of going to kind of a pre-cut or, vendor solution. Even if we have a vendor solution, we are trying to come, again, this is a journey that we are trying to take, right? It's not as kind of clear cut is to kind of come back with some way to kind of dissect that black box to understand what it is. So there's some governance that we are trying to put around it. We are just at the start of the journey. We started organizing about like 4 months ago. We built this team, started building the team, got the leadership, because that is going to be a key factor in driving for us to kind of understand, because the regulators are still breathing around on our neck and saying, what are you doing, right? If you're not clear on what your checkpoints are and your risk controls are, I'm not letting you to go forward, right? Because that is key, because I literally kind of came from an exam 2 months ago. That was their point, like, walk me through the whole process, tell me what the risk controls are, and then tell me how you're validating those risk controls, right? So that's why the black box situation becomes very difficult, saying, hey, you know what? I send something, I get something is not going to work for them to kind of say, you're in a bank, you better basically tell me what goes in, what happens, comes out. So at least we are trying to take an approach of let's put some structure around, put some teams together so that we can create an R&D lab internally to be able to kind of understand these black box a little bit more, and then try to apply some of the controls that we have on top of it and see how that pans out, right? So it is going to be a journey. It's just not going to be able to, like Ajit was saying, 10 years robots, I'm not sure about that yet, but at least we're trying to put some structure around that.
And we actually did the same thing. We have an innovation team that was created a year or two ago for that, for the same reason too, around governance, right? We have a very robust data governance team. So for a lot of the reasons that Carter was talking about. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so a lot of the conversation we have right now is around technology and AI and how we can do things faster, quicker, more accurately, cheaper, etc. Right? Along the customer journey that y'all are seeing, do y'all have instances where you're saying that isn't always the case? Maybe we do need this way to take account. A great example was the keynote yesterday. The concept of me being able to get a mortgage approved in a couple of seconds scares me if the answer is also, but I don't have a way for you to change your mind in a couple of seconds and you're locked in. So do you have instances where you're trying to slow that down or being very aware, because some decisions aren't just the decision, it's what comes after it and what that remorse and buyer's remorse and et cetera brings with it.
I think that's a great question.
Absolutely. Let me kind of address that. So it's very interesting, right? So if you look at it on direct auto loans and all that, people want to see a result right there, because you're sitting in a dealership and you want to know whether you're approved or not, and then if not, then they just want to go somewhere else, right? And that's good for that kind of customer base and the kind of experience that they're expecting on that when you walk in. But when you actually go and look at equipment finance, right, and transportation type of finance, which is a larger deal, you have a lot of mom and pop shops who want to come in, right, and they want to kind of understand with the product, but also see what kind of financing capabilities that they have. But they don't want to have an answer. I mean, you tell me whether I'm qualified, but I don't want you to kind of lock me in, right? Because they want to take back, and legally they have 3 days to kind of go back and think about it, even if you're approved to kind of cancel that, right? So it all depends upon the segment and the industry that we are focused on kind of saying where we need to be kind of doing. So a lot of the AI pieces and a lot of these kind of instant gratification things are happening on the retail side of our business, right? On the commercial side of our business or the wholesale side of the business, it's still kind of more relationship oriented, because that requires a lot more high touch, right, and customer touch point than the retail side of the puzzle. So yes, it absolutely depends upon, because if you come back and ask me, what are we doing on the commercial side for automation? It's you know what? No, I'm not exploring that right now. Because for me, the focus is the retail, but the customer, and on the commercial side, it's all relationship based.
And I also think it comes. Do we have time? Okay.
It's okay.
I also think it comes back to, to the question of, we were talking about with personas, right? Of you have some customers, right, that are, just do it all for me. I don't even want to, just take care of it, right? And then you have some that, that want to know and we can inform, but they want to take every step to do everything. And so I think it is kind of, it's that spectrum of helpful to creepy, right? Where we can be automated to the extent it's helpful, but keep our customers in control, right? So transparency and control, I think, are really something that at Wells Fargo we really try to stress as well to enable our customers.
Great. So we have time for one more question. The lady out there. Hi.
I'm curious about our panelists' funding mechanisms for these new initiatives. Do you have a pot of money that's to try new things? Because it obviously can be very difficult to make a case for something that's so leading edge and so new, and it can even be harder on the customer experience side to prove afterwards, especially after just a pilot or a test, that it's actually paying off, because some of these things have very long-term implications.
That's a great question. So from my portfolio mindset, when I've been struggling with that for almost a few years right now, right, is IT. When they look at from a funding perspective, we have these products that we want to do, go ahead and do it, and that's where we get the money in. So we had to start getting a little more innovative ourselves and seeing how we're going to kind of work through the funding mechanism. So one, within BMO, that what we did was we figured out a way to do some harvest and reinvesting strategy, right? Specifically when in a part of my organization owns vendor management, so we started kind of going in and dipping into our vendors to kind of get some investment done for us, right? And saying, look, like, and again, that comes through scale because we are large enough to kind of go ahead and put the scale factor on top of it and try to come back with some innovation cycle. Now, what's the second part of the puzzle that we actually started attacking it was my CIO started kind of working with the business, trying to kind of talk to them about the business strategy. And then when you sit and talk to them about business strategy and how they're going to fund it, rather than saying, you know what, technology, here's the money that you have, what we said is like, no, let's jointly kind of figure out what the funding mechanism needs to be, right? And we tied in modernization, rationalization together to kind of show what the long-term savings is and how this investment is going to do. That business case actually kind of literally this year, we got almost like, I'm so excited about that, is that we got a more than $10 million funding to kind of do what we call innovation cycle, which we've been fighting for the last 2 years with the business to kind of get us there. So it takes a lot of kind of focus with the vendors and also kind of focus with the business where you can come and sit on the table with the business team when they are trying to do the financials and planning, right? That's going to be a key factor in driving that.
Great. So we have time for one last question. Okay, you're the only one. Go ahead.
Brian Beasley from First Financial Northwest Bank. So like many of us here, AI would be the first step for our bank. Where do we start? I think a lot of us are thinking, I love these ideas, but from starting on your journey, what recommendations would you have to us to say, if you're going to start here?
Ajit, you want to start?
No, I mean, let Christina and Kader first share their experience as banks, and then I can come in. Yeah.
So I don't want to kind of say the same thing 3 times, but I would go back to what your customer wants. I mean, I think, or where we feel, and again, I'm biased because I'm on the customer-facing side. There's probably a whole host of efficiency back office functions from an AI perspective that could make sense as a great starting point if that's what the goal is. So I would look at kind of if we're really focused on from a customer side, really understanding where there are needs that AI could help with. That would be, and that's again, I mean, we come back to looking at our journeys from our customers and where do we feel like there might be inefficiencies in the journeys of what they're trying to do. Can they complete their task? Is it really painful for them to complete their task? And how could AI help with that? Or is it that they want to be able to bank somewhere else that's not on the Wells Fargo site, but want to be able to access it? So I know that's a pretty general answer, but that's the approach we took, is really understanding where there is opportunity from a customer perspective. But
so from a BMO perspective, right? Like where we started was at what we call like anything that is very mundane manual work that can be potentially automated, and kind of looking at it. So our start of the journey was primarily on the call center side, right? Not kind of dealing with the call in a customer directly, but there's processes within the call center, which kind of has a lot of what we talk about as data cleanup, which was much more manual intensive, but it's very repeatable, right? Based on certain patterns, you can start cleaning up the data. So we started there, right? That was the first start of the journey into kind of looking at AI and bots as a process to kind of get in. And now this innovation team has kind of start looking at, like Kristen mentioned, like looking at different journeys, like what business the customer is going through and where we can automate, right? And so that's where we physically started, because we know that we were, not going to impact customer experience, but we can automate so that way we can kind of harvest and reinvest into other areas that we can grow into.
So, I mean, as a service provider, having seen it through different industries, and and you can always kind of learn from different industries on on their lessons, where they succeeded and where they did not and could have done better. So that a few things that I've seen working well than the others is, obviously when you are starting, you don't want to start with a very complex or or a very difficult process. To Kader's point, pick up some quick wins. Right, areas where that you are likely to actually taste more success, because you do need quick wins to kind of go on their journey. Then to Tim's point, we're talking about the whole black box. So therefore, what data can you actually manage and control to be able to again feed into those quick wins. I think the identification of those quick wins is really important. And one learning that I had through some of these implementations is a lot of times the digital strategies want to kind of bring in digital and let's automate it, let's bring in AI, etc. Whereas the problem actually lies somewhere else. It's about the process. Can you optimize the process? Can you make it leaner, simpler, etc. before you really bring in AI? So a lot of digital projects fail because you try to actually bring digital to solve a problem, whereas digital is not solving a problem. It's a means to solve a problem, right? Digital itself is not a solution. So that's very important to actually keep in mind as you are going through starting the journey, because that is where you'll get buy-in from the business. That is where you'll identify the quick wins, and then technology, digital technologies will play their role in bringing the right success.
Wonderful. So if you have any additional questions, please feel free to post them on the BCX app and we will get back to you with the responses. And just to summarize the whole discussion, thank you all of you for joining us today. Customer experience has been a concept age old, right? But AI and digital is bringing in new leash of technology, which is both a challenge and an opportunity for all of us, right? And like they say, you open a bottle of wine only when you know you're going to be able to finish it, right? So the success will go to those who have all the strategy for AI, razor sharp focus on customer experience, and the perseverance to take it to the end and close the loop. So with that, I'll just sum up today's session. Thank you all of you for joining us today.